morning, everybody. I'm Senator Elijah Reichlin-Melnick here with Assemblyman Mike Lawler, and we're going to be talking about the introduction of Paula's Law. This is such an important bill for our community and for communities all over New York State, because it says that it's time to take action when there are horrible, horrible, unspeakable tragedies that take place. Paula Bohovesky was just 16 years old in 1980 when she was brutally attacked, assaulted, and murdered on the way home from school. No, right here from the library. No mother, no family should ever have to go through a trauma like that. And we've got Rosemarie D'Alessandro, who lost her beloved Joan at just 7 years old to a horrible murder. What Paula's Law would do is say that somebody who sexually assaults, who takes the life of a child, must spend their life in prison if they are convicted. They should not have to put families through the re-victimization, through the trauma of having to go before a parole board and argue for why a murderer should remain in prison. New York already requires, under Joan's Law, which was named after Rosemarie's daughter, it already requires that anybody who sexually assaults and murders a child under 14 must stay in prison for the rest of their life without possibility of parole. Paula's Law would raise that to 18 years old, which is long past time. I'm proud to sponsor this legislation with Assemblyman Lawler. We both picked this bill up from our predecessors, Senator Carlucci and Assemblywoman Jaffe, so we thank them for introducing it, and we're looking forward to moving this the final step and getting it over the finish line so that no other family in New York State has to go through what these brave women and these brave families have gone through. I hope that we can pass this bill soon. This year, we can save any other family from going through this, and we can make sure that horrible people like this who have ruined lives, who have taken lives, stay in jail for the rest of their lives where they belong. Thank you. Assemblyman Lawler.
Thank you, Senator Reichlin-Melnick. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Again, I'd like to thank Senator Reichlin-Melnick for carrying this legislation in the Senate. I'd also like to thank Supervisor Kenny, Councilman Valentine, Bottari, and County Legislators John McGowan and Jim Foley for being here with us today. And finally, I'd like to give special thanks to former County Legislator John Murphy, Councilman Dennis Troy, who's not here today, Bob Baird, Bill Schul, and especially Lois Bohovesky for their tireless efforts on behalf of Paula. We deeply appreciate all of you, and will continue to fight alongside you to ensure justice for Paula, Lois, and your entire family. Folks, we gather here today to advocate for a bill which, simply put, must become law. 41 years ago, Paula Bohovesky left work from the library right next to me to head home to her family. And tragically, Paula never made it home that night and was victim to one of the most vile crimes ever perpetrated here in Rockland County. It's time that New York State held people like her two killers accountable for their heinous, horrific actions. The fact that rapists and murderers of children are allowed parole is sickening. It's why Senator Reichlin-Melnick and I have sponsored this legislation. Our bill, Assembly Bill 6017, would prevent the parole of anyone who sexually assaults and murders a child under the age of 18 years old. It's just plain common sense. Sadly, in New York today, we have a parole board that is granting parole to unrepentant cop killers, to child rapists and murderers, and a state legislature that's fighting to give voting rights to these very same people, including one of Paula's killers, Richard LaBarbera, who was released from prison on parole, and potentially her other killer, Robert McCain, who is up for parole this year. It's unconscionable and cannot stand. So today, I implore my colleagues in the State Senate and the Assembly to join Senator Reichlin-Melnick and me in supporting this legislation. This is a bipartisan, common sense piece of legislation that will make our state safer, and ensure tougher penalties for the most heinous criminals out there. Let's do the right thing for Paula, for Joan, and for all the families of victims across our state. Together we can get this done, and let's make Paula's Law an official law here in New York State and ensure that no family has to endure this trauma ever again. And with that, introduce Rosemarie D'Alessandro, mother of Joan D'Alessandro, and an advocate for Joan's Law and Paula's Law here in New York.
So it was Holy Thursday. Holy Thursday in my faith is a big day. Holy Thursday in Easter he was found. And so I always thought that something hopeful was going to happen. And today is something hopeful.
Time we'll ask former County Legislator John Murphy to come up and say a few words.
Paula walked out that door, and every other night she crossed that lawn there with the shortcut to her home. On this incredibly horrible, ugly day, she decided to walk down to buy something in the delicatessen. That decision changed everybody's life. I'll be very brief by saying we live in an era, politically, culturally, racially, that we seek justice for all. Justice for all. Is justice to be found when the murderer walks out the door and enjoys what could be another 20 years of life? He's only 60 years old. And he could vote. Where is the justice? It's not in this law, and it has to be changed.
Thank you, John. John has been a tireless advocate for literally decades for the petition for Paula to try to keep her killers behind bars. We're going to have a few words now from County Legislator John McGowan.
And I urge our state lawmakers to pass this law. It is important because we must not forget what happened. And to the mother of Paula and to Joan, I can tell you that we will never forget you, your families, and as a community, we will never forget the loss that you have suffered, the loss of your daughters.
That concludes our speakers for today. In the Senate, it's Senate Bill 3963. In the Assembly, I think we've got 6017. We're going to be pushing very hard over the final 8 weeks of this legislative session in the Senate and in the Assembly to get this bill through, and we hope the governor would sign it into law. You know, to me, it's a common sense law. You know, if you have somebody that commits, just words cannot describe the type of heinous crime like that. If you have somebody that commits that type of a crime, I do not understand why we would ever want to see them walk the streets again. And so for me, I saw that this was a bill that Senator Carlucci had carried. I said, I absolutely want to put this in, and I was happy to partner with Mike to do that. So, Mike?
Thanks. I think as John McGowan just said, you know, living in Rockland County, growing up in this community, this is something you knew about. It is a horrific incident that occurred that never should have occurred. And I think in recent years, in large part due to the great work of John and Bill and Bob and Paul and Lois, our community has really rallied behind Lois and her family to try and oppose parole for Paula's killers. And tragically, the parole board decided 2 years ago to grant parole to one of her killers, and this year one of her other killers is up for parole. And as far as I'm concerned, anybody who would rape and murder a child has no business being released from prison ever. And so this law is something that I believe in deeply, and it's something that I'm happy to join Senator Reichlin-Melnick in sponsoring. And I think for our community and for both of your families, you know, making sure that the victims are never forgotten is critically important. So that's why I supported this law and was happy to